Story 1. At 2:17 a.m., the emergency dispatcher in Pine Hollow County answered a call that would later be replayed in courtrooms, documentaries, and quiet living rooms where people sat too close to their televisions, afraid to blink. At first, there was only breathing. Not the panicked kind, no gasps, no sobs. Just slow, steady breaths, like someone trying very hard to stay calm. The dispatcher followed protocol, voice measured, professional. 911, what's your emergency? Silence. Then a faint sound. A creak, like wood under weight, or a door opening where it shouldn't. Sir or ma'am, can you hear me? The breathing continued. Somewhere in the background, a television murmured. A laugh track. A joke landing in a room where no one laughed. The dispatcher marked the call as open line. She leaned closer to her headset. That was when she heard it. A woman's voice. Whispering. He said not to hang up. The line went dead. By sunrise, Pine Hollow would learn that the call came from 412, Briarwood Lane. A pale blue house at the edge of town, backed by woods so dense they swallowed sound. The house belonged to the Mercer family. Respected. Quiet. Ordinary in the way that made neighbors describe them with the same 3 words every time. Kept to themselves. Inside that house, police would find a scene so carefully arranged that, for the first few minutes, it almost looked peaceful. Almost. Pine Hollow was the kind of town where nothing happened loudly. It sat between 2 highways nobody used unless they were lost or desperate. 1 blinking traffic light. 1 high school. 1 diner that closed at 8 p.m. and served the same menu it had served since the 1980s. When people died there, it was usually old age, or farming accidents, or heart attacks that came quietly in recliners. Not murder. Certainly not this. Officer Daniel Reyes was first on scene. 26 years old. 3 months into his transfer from a bigger city where violence had background noise. Pine Hollow was supposed to be easier, safer, a place to breathe. He parked his cruiser behind an unmarked sedan already in the driveway. The front door of the Mercer house was slightly open, porch light still on, buzzing with insects. Reyes hesitated before stepping inside. That hesitation would follow him for the rest of his life. The air inside the house was cold. Too cold for early spring. The thermostat read 62 degrees. Someone had turned it down deliberately. The living room was immaculate. Couch cushions aligned. Coffee table cleared except for 1 object placed carefully in the center, a cordless phone. The screen still glowed. Call ended. 2:18 a.m. Reyes spoke into his radio. Dispatch, I'm inside the residence. I have an open line call confirmed. No response came back immediately. That was when he noticed the smell. Not blood. Not decay. Cleaning solution. Strong. Sharp. Recent. Reyes followed the smell down the hallway. 3 doors. 2 closed. 1 open at the end. The master bedroom. He stepped inside and stopped breathing. The Mercers were on the bed. Evan Mercer lay on his back, hands folded neatly over his chest. Eyes closed as if asleep. No visible wounds. No blood. His wife, Lila, lay beside him, turned slightly toward the window, hair brushed smooth against the pillow. They looked posed. Reyes reached out, gloved fingers trembling, and touched Evan's wrist. Cold. Too cold. Time of death would later be estimated at several hours before the 911 call, which raised the first question investigators couldn't answer. Who made the call? By mid-morning, Pine Hollow was crawling with state police. Yellow tape wrapped around Briarwood Lane like a warning nobody had seen coming. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering theories they'd later deny ever saying out loud. Detective Mara Holt arrived just after 9 a.m. She had grown up 2 counties over, left for the academy, and never looked back, until now. At 39, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. Her hair was pulled back tight, her eyes sharp, already cataloging details before anyone spoke. She stood in the Mercer bedroom, hands on her hips, and frowned. "This is wrong," she said. The medical examiner glanced up from his clipboard. "Wrong how?" Holt gestured at the bodies. No defensive wounds. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. But also no obvious cause of death. "Poison," someone suggested. "Maybe," Holt said. "But look at them. They're staged. This isn't just killing. This is presentation. She turned back to the living room and stared at the phone. "Tell me about the call." The dispatcher's recording was played twice. Then a third time. Each time, the room grew quieter. The whisper replayed again. "He said not to hang up." Holt felt something tighten in her chest. "Who's he?" she asked. No one answered. The autopsy results complicated everything. Cause of death, asphyxiation. Not manual strangulation. Not suffocation with a pillow. A chemical agent. Someone had released a gas into the house while the Mercers slept. A precise amount. Enough to kill them slowly, without panic, without waking. The killer had known exactly what they were doing. But the gas alone didn't explain the call, which meant someone else had been alive in that house after Evan and Lila Mercer were already dead. That someone had been scared, and that someone had been following instructions. The Mercers had one child, 19-year-old Hannah Mercer. She was not in the house when police arrived. Her car was missing. Her phone went straight to voicemail. By noon, Pine Hollow had a new word buzzing through it like electricity. Missing. Detective Holt stood in the driveway, staring down Briarwood Lane toward the tree line. She imagined the woods at night. How sound disappeared there. How easy it would be to hide someone. Or to watch. She turned to Officer Reyes, who stood nearby, pale and quiet. "You said the TV was on when you arrived?" "Yes, ma'am. Sitcom. Volume low." "Was it on a timer?" Reyes shook his head. "No. Remote was on the couch. Like someone had just used it." Holt nodded slowly. Someone had been awake. Someone had been listening. At 4:46 p.m., Hannah Mercer's car was found abandoned 20 miles away, parked crookedly at a rural gas station off Highway 9. The keys were still in the ignition. Her backpack sat on the passenger seat. Inside it, her wallet, her ID, her cash, and a folded piece of paper with 6 words written in careful, deliberate handwriting. "I did what you said." By nightfall, Pine Hollow County officially had its first homicide investigation in over a decade. By the end of the week, it would have a name the media would repeat until it lost all meaning. The Briarwood silence. But Detective Mara Holt knew something the headlines didn't. This wasn't over. It hadn't even started yet. Because whoever made that call, they hadn't been asking for help. They had been checking in. Hannah Mercer had always been good at doing what she was told. Teachers described her as quiet but reliable. Coaches said she followed instructions to the letter. Friends, what few she had, joked that Hannah could be trusted to show up early to her own surprise party. Obedience wasn't weakness in Pine Hollow. It was survival. You learned early not to draw attention, not to ask questions that made adults uncomfortable, not to notice things that were easier left unseen. Hannah learned those lessons at home. The Mercer house had rules. Not the spoken kind, written on a fridge or taped to a wall, but the kind that lived in tone, timing, and silence. Rule 1. Don't wake your father after 10. Rule 2. Don't ask why your mother was crying. Rule 3. If Evan Mercer tells you to do something, you do it. Immediately. Evan Mercer was a respected man in Pine Hollow. He coached Little League. He organized charity drives. He shook hands firmly and looked people in the eye. At home, his voice never rose. That was what made it dangerous. Detective Mara Holt sat across from Hannah's empty bed that afternoon, staring at the neatly made sheets, the textbook stacked just so on the desk. Everything about the room screamed control. No posters. No mess. No rebellion. "This isn't a runaway," Holt murmured. Officer Reyes nodded. Car was left like she wanted it found. Or like someone told her where to leave it. Holt opened the nightstand drawer. Inside was a small digital recorder. Her jaw tightened. Hannah had started recording 3 months earlier. At first, it was accidental. She'd been recording a lecture for school when her father walked into her room without knocking. The way his voice changed, flat, measured, cold, made her press save instead of delete. After that, she recorded everything. The files were numbered, labeled by date. Holt slipped on headphones and pressed play. Evan Mercer's voice filled the room. "If you hang up, they'll come faster. You don't want that." Holt froze. She checked the date. 2 nights before the murders. The recording continued. "You stay calm. You follow instructions. And everyone stays safe." Hannah's voice followed. Small. Shaking. "What if I mess up?" A pause. "Then your mother pays for it." Holt ripped the headphones off. This wasn't persuasion. This was training. The recordings painted a slow, horrifying picture. Evan Mercer had been preparing his daughter for something, testing her obedience, making her practice answering questions without giving answers, teaching her how to sound calm while terrified, teaching her how to lie. One recording stood out. When the phone rings, Evan said, "You answer, even if I tell you not to." "Why?" Hannah asked. "Because sometimes help is more dangerous than silence." Detective Holt closed her eyes. The 911 call hadn't been Hannah's cry for rescue. It had been a test. But Evan Mercer was dead. So who was still giving orders? At the gas station where Hannah's car was found, investigators pulled security footage. The camera was old, the image grainy, but the timestamp was clear. 3:02 a.m. Hannah pulled in alone. She sat in the car for nearly 6 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. Then headlights appeared behind her. Another vehicle. She didn't turn to look. She stepped out of the car. The footage caught just one clear detail before the car behind her rolled forward, blocking the camera's view. A man's silhouette. Tall, broad shoulders, and something else. He was smiling. The gas station clerk remembered her. "Poor kid looked half dead already," he said, like she hadn't slept in days. "Did she say anything?" Holt asked. "She asked if the bathroom was open. That's it. Anyone with her?" He hesitated. "There was a man. Didn't come inside. Just watched." "Can you describe him?" The clerk shook his head slowly. "Felt wrong. That's all I got." Wrong was becoming a pattern. By day 3, the media descended. They framed Hannah as either victim or accomplice, depending on the hour and the headline. Social media dissected her smile from old yearbook photos. Comment sections decided her guilt with frightening certainty. "She sounds calm on the call. Why didn't she scream?" Girls like that know exactly what they're doing. Detective Holt refused to read any of it. She focused instead on Evan Mercer's past. And what she found there made her stomach turn. 10 years earlier, Evan Mercer had worked as a corrections officer at Briar Ridge Detention Center. 3 inmates under his supervision had died. Officially suicide, overdose, medical complication. Unofficially, each death had involved an open-line phone call. One inmate had called his sister and whispered, "He's here." Another called a legal aid office and stayed silent for over 3 minutes before the line disconnected. The third never spoke at all, just breathed. The calls were dismissed as coincidences. Until now. Mara Holt sat alone in her office that night, files spread out like pieces of a puzzle she desperately didn't want to complete. Evan Mercer hadn't just trained his daughter. He'd learned this somewhere, and someone had learned it with him. At 11:48 p.m., Holt's phone rang. Private number. She hesitated, then answered. Detective Holt. Breathing. Slow. Steady. A man's voice followed, amused. "You found the recorder." Holt stood so fast her chair clattered behind her. "Who is this?" A soft chuckle. "You already know." "No," Holt snapped. "I don't." "You do," he said calmly. "Because Evan told you. You just didn't know it yet." Holt's hand shook. "Where is Hannah?" A pause. "She did very well," the voice said. "Exactly what she was told." "Is she alive?" Another pause. Longer. "Depends," he replied, "on whether you can follow instructions too." The line went dead. Holt slammed the phone down, heart pounding. This wasn't a copycat. This wasn't revenge. This was continuation. Evan Mercer had been part of something bigger. A system. A shared language of fear and obedience. And when Evan died, the responsibility had passed, not to Hannah, but to the person who had always been watching. Training her. Testing her. Waiting. At 2:17 a.m. the next night, another call came into dispatch. Open line. Breathing. This time, the whisper said only 3 words. "She's still listening." The dispatcher on duty that night had learned, the hard way, not to trust silence. After the Briarwood call, Pine Hollow County had issued new internal guidance. Any open line after midnight gets immediate escalation. No waiting. No assumptions. So when the phone lit up at 2:17 a.m., the same minute, down to the second, the dispatcher's stomach dropped. She didn't say hello. She just listened. Breathing. Slow. Controlled. Then the whisper came, closer to the receiver than before. "She's still listening." The dispatcher's hand hovered over the panic button. "Who is this?" she asked, voice steady by force alone. Silence. Then a sound that made her blood run cold. A smile audible through the phone. Detective Mara Holt was already awake when the call came in. She hadn't slept since the private number call the night before. She sat at her kitchen table surrounded by Evan Mercer's old files, photographs, transcripts of disciplinary hearings that never led anywhere. When her phone rang, she answered before it completed the first vibration. "They called again," the dispatcher said. Same time, same breathing. Holt closed her eyes. "Trace. Already working it. But you know how this goes. Disposable phones. Signal hops. Digital smoke." Holt grabbed her coat. "I'm coming in." At headquarters, the recording played on a loop. No background noise this time. No TV. No creaking floors. Just breath. And the whisper. "He's learning," Holt murmured. Reyes frowned. "Learning what?" "How much we're willing to move," she said. "How fast we react. How predictable we are." This wasn't about Hannah anymore. This was about control. The trace finally came back with something, barely. The call had pinged off a tower near Pine Hollow Lake. An old recreational area. Cabins. Trails. Mostly abandoned this time of year. Holt's pulse quickened. "Get a unit out there. Quiet. No lights." As officers mobilized, Holt studied the lake on the map. One access road. Thick tree cover. Long sight lines. A perfect place to watch someone approach. Or to make another call. They found the phone near the water's edge. Placed upright on a rock. Still warm. But no sign of the caller. Reyes scanned the tree line. "He wanted us to find it." "Yes," Holt said. "He always does." Near the phone lay something else. A small object wrapped in plastic. Holt crouched and peeled it open. A USB drive. Back at headquarters, the tech team loaded the drive in a sandbox environment. One video file. No title. No metadata. Holt stood behind the analyst as the screen flickered to life. The image was dim, grainy. A single overhead bulb swayed slightly, casting shadows that made the room feel like it was breathing. Hannah Mercer sat in a chair. Her hands were free. Her posture straight. Her face calm. Too calm. She looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," she said evenly, "it means I did what he told me to." Holt swallowed. Hannah continued. "He said I shouldn't cry. That crying makes people rush. He doesn't like that." A man's voice off camera chuckled softly. "Good," he said. "Very good." Holt's hands clenched into fists. "He told me to explain," Hannah went on, "that this isn't about my parents. They were part of something that hurt people. This is about balance." She paused. "And about practice." The video cut to black. Silence filled the room. Then Reyes spoke. "Practice for what?" Holt already knew. For a bigger audience. At 4:03 a.m., a call came into a local radio station. Open line. The host, half asleep and annoyed, tapped the mic. "You're on the air." Breathing. Then the whisper. "Listen carefully." The station cut the call after 6 seconds. Too late. Within an hour, the clip was everywhere. Pine Hollow woke to panic. The man wasn't hiding anymore. He was teaching. Holt revisited the old Briar Ridge files with new eyes. Evan Mercer's name appeared again and again, not as the accused, but as the note-taker. The observer. The one who documented reactions. He'd worked under a senior officer. Name Caleb Rourke. Discharged 8 years ago. Reason, unethical conduct. Unofficial reason? Inmate psychological manipulation. Rourke specialized in compliance conditioning. Teaching people to follow instructions under stress. Teaching them to remain calm while terrified. Teaching them to obey voices. Rourke had vanished after his discharge. No fixed address. No digital footprint. But he'd left behind students. Evan Mercer had been one of them. Holt felt sick. Evan hadn't been the architect. He'd been a participant. And now, a failed subject. That night, Holt went home and didn't turn on the lights. She sat in the dark and waited. At 2:17 a.m., her phone rang. Private number. She answered. "I knew you would," the voice said warmly. "Rourke," Holt said. A soft laugh. "Ah, so you are learning. What do you want?" Holt demanded. "To see if you can listen," he replied. Evan couldn't. He started making mistakes. You killed him. No, Rourke said gently. I corrected him. Where is Hannah? She's safe, he said. For now. She understands the rules. Holt's jaw tightened. This ends. Oh no, Rourke said. This is the part where it begins. A pause. Tomorrow night, he continued, someone else will listen. Someone you don't know. And if you fail, his voice softened. She'll pay for it. The line went dead. Holt sat motionless. She had one night. One chance to break a system built on fear, patience, and obedience. And the man on the other end of the line, he believed no one ever did. Caleb Rourke believed rules only mattered if people were afraid to break them. That was the first thing Detective Mara Holt understood as dawn crept over Pine Hollow. Rourke wasn't improvising. He wasn't reacting. He was executing a framework, one refined over years, built on silence, obedience, and the slow erosion of will. And frameworks always had rules. By 7 a.m., Holt had assembled a task force so small it bordered on reckless. No press, no state police, no federal escalation. Just Holt, Reyes, a behavioral analyst named Dr. Simone Adler, and 2 tech officers she trusted with her life. If Rourke suspected a crowd, he'd disappear. Or worse, he'd accelerate. Dr. Adler listened to the call recordings twice, then leaned back slowly. He doesn't threaten the way most predators do, she said. He educates. Every interaction is a lesson. He's teaching compliance, conditioning listeners to associate silence with safety. Like Hannah, Reyes said quietly. Yes, Adler replied, but also like Evan Mercer, and the inmates before him. Holt rubbed her temples. So what are the rules? Adler stood and wrote on the board. Rule 1, speak only when instructed. Rule 2, calm equals survival. Rule 3, authority is invisible but absolute. She underlined the last one. He never appears physically unless necessary, Adler said. His power comes from distance, from the voice. And the calls? Holt asked. Check-ins, Adler said. Reinforcement. He's making sure the conditioning holds. Holt stared at the board. Then let's break the rules. At 11:19 a.m., the team got their first crack. A 911 call came in, not from Rourke, but from a woman named Ellen Price. 48. School secretary. No criminal history. The call was open line. Breathing. Dispatch froze. Then Ellen whispered, he told me to wait. Holt was already moving. Ellen Price's house sat 3 streets over from the Mercer place. Same architectural style. Same era. Same quiet isolation. Too similar. Officers surrounded the home silently. No sirens. No announcements. Holt entered through the back. Ellen sat at the kitchen table, hands folded neatly, phone on speaker in front of her. Her eyes flicked up when Holt entered, but she didn't speak. On the phone, breathing. Then Rourke's voice. Very good, he said. You're calm. Holt stepped forward. Caleb Rourke. This is Detective Holt. Silence. Then a low chuckle. Rule violation, Rourke said. That wasn't your turn. Ellen flinched. Holt raised her hands slowly. Ellen, you're safe. He can't hurt you. Rourke sighed. Detective, do you hear that? Holt listened. Ellen's breathing had quickened. Her calm is breaking, Rourke said softly. That's on you. Holt swallowed hard. What do you want? To see if you can listen, he replied. Like she is. A long pause. Then Rourke spoke again, firm now. Ellen. End the call. Ellen's hand hovered over the phone. Holt locked eyes with her. Don't. Ellen trembled. Rourke's voice sharpened. Now. Ellen pressed end. The line went dead. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Ellen burst into tears. She was alive. Unharmed. Holt exhaled shakily. Rourke hadn't punished her. Which meant, he's escalating, Adler said later. Withholding consequences is part of the conditioning. He's building confidence for himself. And for Holt, it meant one thing. Rourke was preparing a bigger test. That test came at 2:17 a.m. Of course it did. But this time, the call didn't go to dispatch. It went to Holt's personal phone. She answered in silence, breathing. Then his voice. You interfered. Yes, Holt said. And she lived. For now, Rourke replied. You're missing the lesson. Enlighten me. You still think this is about saving people, he said. It's not. It's about teaching them to survive. By breaking them? Holt snapped. No, he said calmly. By showing them how fragile choice is. Holt closed her eyes. Where is Hannah? A pause. Then, listening. The next morning, the USB drive arrived. No return address. Inside, another video. Hannah again, but standing this time. Behind her, a whiteboard. Written in thick black marker. Rules of silence. Hannah spoke clearly. Rule 1, you don't speak unless you're told. Rule 2, you don't ask questions. Rule 3, you don't panic. Rule 4, if you're calm, you live. She hesitated. And Rule 5, Rourke stepped into frame for the first time. Not fully, just his shoulder. His jaw. Rule 5, he said, is that everyone listens eventually. The video ended. Dr. Adler's face had gone pale. He's preparing a broadcast, she said. Mass conditioning. He wants an audience. And Hannah? Reyes asked. She's proof of concept. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. One of the tech officers flagged an anomaly, background interference on the calls. A faint rhythmic clicking, not random, repeating every 12 seconds. Railroad signals. Holt's heart pounded. There's an abandoned switching station near Pine Hollow Lake, Reyes said. Shut down years ago. Holt grabbed her jacket. That's where he's staging from. But Hannah, Reyes began. She won't be there, Holt said grimly. He never keeps the subject near the control room. They found the station just after midnight. Dark, silent, power long gone. Inside, dusty monitors, old chairs, and a single active device. A laptop. On screen, a timer. 2 minutes and 17 seconds. Counting down. Holt's phone rang. Rourke. You found the classroom, he said pleasantly. But you're late. What have you done? Holt demanded. I've given her a choice, he replied. Something I never did before. The timer hit 0. Across Pine Hollow, every local station cut to emergency override. A live feed. Hannah Mercer, standing alone, looking directly into the camera. I'm allowed to speak now, she said. Holt's blood ran cold. Because tonight, Hannah continued, you're the ones who have to listen. The broadcast hijacked Pine Hollow at exactly 2:17 a.m. Every television, every radio, every phone with notifications enabled. Static bled into Hannah Mercer's face, pale, steady, framed against a blank wall that gave nothing away. No windows, no clues, just her, centered, composed. Too composed. Detective Mara Holt stood in the abandoned switching station, staring at the laptop as if it might bleed answers if she looked hard enough. Dr. Adler whispered, she's dissociated. Hannah began to speak. I was told silence keeps you alive, she said evenly. I was told calm makes you invisible. Her eyes didn't blink. But I learned something else. Behind her voice, a low tone pulsed, almost subliminal. A metronome. Conditioning layered on conditioning. I learned that silence also hides the person giving orders. The feed flickered. Rourke's voice cut in, calm warning. Hannah, remember Rule 1. She inhaled slowly, then exhaled. No, she said. For the first time since this began, Holt felt hope. In homes across Pine Hollow, people leaned closer to their screens. The broadcast wasn't loud. It didn't shout or threaten. That was what made it terrifying. He taught me to listen for breathing, Hannah continued. To measure pauses. To obey tone instead of words. Her gaze sharpened. But he never taught me what happens when everyone listens at once. The metronome sound stuttered. Rourke's voice returned, less amused now. You're breaking protocol. Yes, Hannah replied. That's the point. At the switching station, the tech officer shouted. Signal origin is bouncing. He's not here. Holt slammed her hand against the desk. Find him. Another call came in on Holt's phone. She answered on speaker. Rourke's voice was tighter now. Controlled but strained. She's improvising, he said. You've contaminated the lesson. You did that yourself, Holt snapped. You gave her a voice. Silence. Then Rourke spoke again, slower. Every subject fails eventually, he said. That's why we escalate. Holt's stomach dropped. What did you do? Rourke didn't answer. On screen, Hannah's composure cracked, just slightly. He told me, she said, that if I spoke without permission, someone else would pay. A tear slid down her cheek. My mother already did. Gasps rippled through the town. But he said it would be worse next time. Hannah looked down. Someone in Pine Hollow is listening right now, she said softly. Someone he chose. Holt's blood turned to ice. At dispatch, alarms erupted. Open lines flooded in. Dozens. Breathing. Whispers. People repeating the same phrase over and over. He told me to stay calm. Rourke had seeded the town. Dozens of Ellens. This wasn't a test. It was an experiment. Dr. Adler grabbed Holt's arm. He's forcing a mass response. If you counter-command publicly, you become the authority. Or I kill them, Holt said. Yes, Adler replied. But if you stay silent, he wins anyway. Holt looked back at Hannah on the screen, at the girl who had learned every rule, and was now breaking them. Holt stepped forward into the camera feed's return channel. Her voice went live across Pine Hollow. This is Detective Mara Holt, she said clearly. Everyone listening, hear me. Rourke's voice cut in instantly. No, Holt continued. You're not in danger for speaking. You're not in danger for hanging up. The person controlling you is lying. Breathing spiked across the open lines. Rourke shouted, Stop. Holt didn't. You don't need to be calm, she said. You need to be human. For a heartbeat, the town held its breath. Then, someone screamed. A phone disconnected. Then another. Then dozens. The silence shattered. Rourke's voice was no longer calm. You've ruined everything, he hissed. No, Holt said. You did. By underestimating her. On screen, Hannah straightened. You told me everyone listens eventually, she said. You were wrong. She reached up. The feed jolted. The metronome stopped. Static swallowed the screen. Trace him now. Holt shouted. Tech fingers flew. A location hit. Not Pine Hollow Lake. Not the switching station. A moving signal. A vehicle. Holt grabbed her keys. Where is Hannah? Reyes asked. Holt's jaw set. Wherever he's going. Because for the first time, Caleb Rourke wasn't teaching. He was running. The signal moved fast. Too fast for back roads. Too deliberate for panic. He's on Route 9, the tech officer said, voice tight. Southbound. Speed steady. He wants us to follow. Mara Holt slid behind the wheel before the sentence finished. Headlights cut through the dark as her cruiser tore onto the highway. Reyes followed close behind. No sirens. No radio chatter. Rourke had trained them too well to announce themselves. He's still controlling the pace, Reyes said. Yes, Holt replied. This is his final lesson. The live broadcast had gone dark, but its aftershocks rippled everywhere. Dispatch lines were chaos. People crying, shouting, apologizing for not being calm enough. Officers were dispatched to homes across Pine Hollow, finding shaken residents alive, untouched, terrified of a man who had never been in the room. Rourke hadn't needed to hurt them. Fear had done the work. Except for one person. Hannah. The signal slowed near an industrial stretch abandoned after the paper mill closed. Rusted fences. Crumbling warehouses. A place where sound echoed and nobody came unless they meant to disappear. He's stopping, Reyes said. Holt pulled in behind a long, windowless van parked beside Warehouse C. The engine was still running. The passenger door was open. Inside, the floor was bare metal. And in the center, a chair. Empty. Holt's chest tightened. No, she whispered. Rourke's phone rang before she could move. She answered. You followed beautifully, he said, almost proud. You always were my most promising variable. You don't get to talk like that, Holt said. This is over. Rourke laughed softly. That's what Evans said, right before he failed. Where is she? A pause. She's listening, Rourke replied. Like you taught her. I didn't teach her anything, Holt snapped. Yes, you did, he said. You showed her what happens when silence breaks. Holt stepped fully into the warehouse. The sound of her boots echoed too loudly. You said you were testing obedience, Holt said. But this isn't about that. You need witnesses. You need proof. I need completion, Rourke corrected. A final instruction. Lights flickered on overhead. Hannah stood at the far end of the warehouse. Unrestrained. Alive. Her eyes met Holt's. She didn't look afraid. She looked ready. Rourke's voice echoed through hidden speakers. Hannah, he said calmly, Rule 5. Hannah inhaled. Holt shouted, Don't listen to him. Hannah raised her hand slightly. Rule 5, she said, steady but shaking, is that everyone listens eventually. Rourke's voice softened. Good. Now listen to this. A beat. Walk to the door. Don't look back. Hannah took one step. Holt froze. This was it. The last instruction. If Hannah obeyed, Rourke won, even if Holt caught him. Control didn't need survival. It just needed proof. Hannah, Holt said, lowering her voice, look at me. Hannah hesitated. Rourke snapped, eyes forward. Holt ignored him. You already broke his rules, Holt said gently. You spoke. You chose. That means you don't belong to him anymore. Hannah's breathing quickened. Rourke's tone sharpened. You're losing calm. Hannah stopped walking. Her hands clenched. I was calm when my mother died, she said quietly. Silence crashed through the warehouse. Even Rourke didn't speak. I was calm when you told me to stay quiet, Hannah continued. And when you told me to listen. She turned, looked directly at the nearest camera. But you never told me what to do when you were wrong. The speakers exploded with feedback. Rourke screamed, Stop. Hannah stepped away from the door, toward Holt. I'm done listening, she said. A gunshot cracked through the warehouse. Reyes tackled Holt as the bullet shattered a light above them. Officers swarmed from every entrance. The speakers went dead. Somewhere deeper in the building, footsteps pounded, then stopped. Then nothing. They found Rourke in a control room behind false walls. No weapon in hand. No fight left. Just a man staring at silent monitors. They weren't calm, he whispered when Holt approached. They were supposed to stay calm. Holt cuffed him without a word. For the first time, he didn't resist. Hannah sat on the warehouse floor wrapped in a blanket as dawn crept through broken windows. Holt crouched beside her. You're safe, Holt said. Hannah nodded once. I know. After a moment, she asked, Will he still talk to me? No, Holt said firmly. He doesn't get to anymore. Hannah closed her eyes. Relief finally broke through. As Rourke was led away, he turned to Holt one last time. You think this ends it, he said quietly. But silence always comes back. Holt met his gaze. So does noise. The town didn't sleep after Caleb Rourke was arrested. Pine Hollow lay awake in a strange, trembling quiet. The kind that comes not from peace, but from the absence of a sound you've been bracing yourself to hear. Phones sat untouched on nightstands. Television stayed dark. People held their breath without realizing they were doing it. Because after days of being told when to breathe, when to stay calm, when to listen, silence felt dangerous. Hannah Mercer spent her first night free in a hospital room 2 counties away. Doctors said she was physically unharmed, dehydrated, exhausted, elevated cortisol levels that would take months to normalize. No one mentioned trauma out loud. Detective Mara Holt sat in the chair by her bed, long past the end of her shift. Do you still hear him? Holt asked gently. Hannah considered the question. Sometimes, she said, but now I know it's not real. It's like an echo. That will fade, Holt said. Hannah nodded. I hope so. Then, after a long pause, I didn't know how loud fear was until it stopped. Holt felt that settled deep in her chest. The evidence room filled quickly. Phones, recorders, USB drives, notebooks filled with meticulous handwriting, logs of breathing patterns, response times, voice modulation notes. Rourke hadn't just studied people. He'd cataloged them. Dr. Adler stood over one notebook, face pale. He wasn't improvising victims, she said. He was building a curriculum. How many? Reyes asked. Adler didn't answer right away. More than we'll ever know, she said finally. Media pressure exploded. Rourke's face dominated screens nationwide. Former inmates came forward with stories eerily similar to Hannah's. Voices in the dark, instructions whispered through phones, obedience rewarded with survival. But the town of Pine Hollow refused interviews. They closed ranks. This was their wound. At the arraignment, Rourke stood straight, expression neutral. He didn't look at Hannah. He didn't look at Holt. When the judge asked if he understood the charges, he answered calmly. Yes, as if compliance still mattered. Holt watched from the back of the courtroom. She expected anger. She felt none, only exhaustion. And something else, unease. Because Rourke hadn't screamed when he was caught. He hadn't begged. He'd gone quiet. 2 weeks later, the first death occurred. An inmate at Briar Ridge Detention Center. Open line call to his mother. Breathing. Then silence. Ruled a suicide. Holt stared at the report, heart pounding. They said he was a former associate of Rourke, Reyes said quietly. Minimal contact. Years ago. Holt shook her head. No. What? He wouldn't do it himself, she said. He's too proud. You think? I think the lesson survived him. Hannah was released into protective custody under a new name. Before she left, she handed Holt something. The digital recorder. I don't need this anymore, Hannah said. But you might. Holt accepted it carefully. Thank you for listening, Hannah added. Holt watched her walk away. Stronger than anyone would ever know. That night, Holt went home and sat alone in the dark. She didn't turn on the TV. She didn't check her phone. She just listened. For nothing. At 2:17 a.m., her phone buzzed. A message. No number. Just text. Are you calm? Holt's breath caught. Then she typed back. I'm awake. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. The phone went silent. Across Pine Hollow, a radio crackled to life for half a second. Breathing. Then, static. Holt leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Rourke was gone. But fear had a longer shelf life than men. And silence? Silence remembered everything. The problem with silence was that it never stayed empty. Detective Mara Holt learned that in the weeks after Rourke's arrest, when Pine Hollow tried to return to the rhythm it had always known, the diner reopened past sunset. The high school held its spring assembly. The blinking traffic light blinked like it always had. But something underneath had shifted. People flinched at ringing phones. Dispatchers hesitated before answering open lines. And every night, without meaning to, half the town checked the clock at 2:17 a.m. Fear had learned the schedule. Dr. Simone Adler called it residual conditioning. When someone controls you through repetition, she explained, the absence of the controller doesn't immediately free you. The brain fills the gap. With what? Holt asked. Adler didn't hesitate. Expectation. The second incident happened in a grocery store. A teenage cashier froze mid-scan when her phone rang in her pocket. She stood there, breathing steadily, eyes unfocused, repeating softly, "Stay calm. Stay calm." No voice on the line. No instruction. Just silence. By the time someone snapped her out of it, she was shaking uncontrollably. Holt added another mark to the board. Not Rourke. Not direct contact. Still compliant. The echo was spreading. The task force grew again, quietly. Psychologists. Trauma specialists. Signal analysts. No one said it out loud, but they all felt it. This case didn't end with an arrest. It ended with deprogramming an entire town. Then the recordings started surfacing. Anonymous uploads. Old voicemails. Audio clips pulled from forgotten devices. Breathing. Pauses. A familiar cadence. But the voice wasn't Rourke's. It was younger. Less refined. An imitation. Copycats. Reyes asked. Holt shook her head. No. Students. They traced the first upload to a college student 3 states away. Former juvenile inmate. Spent 6 months at Briar Ridge. He says Rourke never spoke to him directly, Adler said after reviewing the interview. Just listened. Corrected others. Modeled behavior. Holt felt cold. Rourke hadn't needed to teach everyone. He'd taught a few. The rest learned by watching. That night, Holt listened to Hannah's old recorder again. She'd avoided it since the warehouse. But now she needed to understand what lingered. One file had never been played. Labeled simply Echo. She pressed play. Hannah's voice quiet. If you're hearing this, it means he's gone. But it also means you're still listening. A pause. He said echoes mean the lesson worked. Holt swallowed. But echoes fade, Hannah continued. Only if you answer them with something louder. The recording ended. At 2:17 a.m. the next night, Holt didn't wait. She made the call herself. A public address override. Every local station. Every frequency. No breathing. No whisper. Just her voice. This is Detective Mara Holt, she said. If you're listening because you're afraid, you don't have to be calm anymore. You don't have to be quiet. Fear loses power when it's heard. She paused. And if you think silence is control, remember this. She took a breath. Silence filled the airwaves. Then she ended the broadcast. The next morning, something changed. Dispatch reported fewer open lines. Hospitals saw fewer panic episodes. The clock still read 2:17, but fewer people looked at it. The echo didn't vanish, but it weakened. Rourke watched none of it. In his cell, he sat motionless, refusing interviews, refusing calls. When Holt visited him one final time, he didn't smile. "They're still listening," he said quietly. Holt leaned forward. "No," she replied. "They're learning when not to." For the first time, Rourke looked uncertain. Weeks later, Hannah sent a letter. No return address. Just 6 words written in careful handwriting. The echo is quieter now. Holt folded the letter and placed it in the case file. Closed. Almost. Because echoes never truly disappeared. They just waited. Choice made a sound. Not a loud one. Not the kind that shattered windows or set off alarms. It sounded like hesitation. Like breath taken without permission. Detective Mara Holt noticed it first in herself. 3 months after the arrest, Pine Hollow no longer flinched at every ring, but nobody trusted quiet either. The town existed in a fragile middle space, learning how to live without instructions. Holt stood in the hallway outside Dispatch one evening, listening to the normal noise of work. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, low voices overlapping. Ordinary sounds. Yet every time a call came in and stayed open too long, the room still paused. Not out of fear, out of choice. Someone always decided whether to speak first. The call that changed everything came in at 2:17 a.m. Of course it did. Open line. Breathing. But this time, the dispatcher didn't freeze. She leaned into the mic. 911, she said calmly. You don't have to stay silent. A pause. Then a woman spoke. He told me if I talked, I'd fail. The dispatcher shook her head slowly, though the caller couldn't see her. You're already succeeding, she said. You're talking. The line stayed open. And for the first time since Briarwood Lane, no one whispered. Holt arrived to find a young woman sitting on the curb outside her apartment, wrapped in a blanket, shaking but alive. No signs of restraint. No injuries. Just fear. He never called again, the woman said. After I spoke, Holt felt something settle inside her. The echo wasn't gone, but it was losing authority. The trial began quietly. No spectacle. No grandstanding. Caleb Rourke sat through testimony without expression as former inmates described voices that trained them to obey, as psychologists explained conditioning, as Hannah Mercer, face shielded, voice steady, described learning to mistake calm for safety. When asked why she finally spoke, Hannah answered simply, because silence was louder than fear. Rourke looked up at that, just once. Outside the courthouse, Holt stood with Dr. Adler. You hear it? Adler asked. Hear what? Adler smiled faintly. The space between responses. People thinking before reacting. Choice. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. Life without parole. Rourke didn't react. But when he was led away, he said one last thing, quiet enough that only Holt heard it. They'll still listen when it's dark. Holt didn't argue. She didn't need to. Months passed. Pine Hollow changed in small, meaningful ways. Dispatch added a new protocol, open line reassurance. Schools taught students how to recognize coercive silence. The diner stayed open past midnight, just because it could. At 2:17 a.m., Holt often sat awake, not out of fear, but habit. One night, her phone rang. Private number. She answered. Silence. No breathing. No whisper. Just an open line. Holt waited. Then she spoke. You don't get control anymore. The line disconnected. Hannah's final letter arrived that spring. No fear in the handwriting. No rules. Just one sentence. Choice is louder than silence. Holt placed it on her desk and leaned back, listening to the sounds of the station around her. Life. Messy. Noisy. Human. Exactly the way Rourke hated it. The line didn't go dead all at once. It faded, like a sound carried too far, stretched too thin to mean anything anymore. That was how Detective Mara Holt knew it was finally over. The last open line call came in on an ordinary Tuesday. No timestamp significance. No pattern. No performance. Just a phone left off the hook by an elderly man who had fallen asleep in his recliner. Dispatch stayed on the line for 3 minutes, speaking gently, reassuringly, until he woke up confused and embarrassed. No fear. No whisper. No obedience. When the call ended, no one checked the clock. Pine Hollow learned how to be noisy again. Children shouted across yards. Cars honked impatiently at the blinking traffic light. The diner installed a jukebox that someone always set too loud. Silence lost its authority. Caleb Rourke aged quickly in prison. Without an audience, without subjects, his theories shriveled. Guards reported that he tried to instruct them at first, subtle corrections, measured tone. They ignored him. That hurt more than resistance ever could. Eventually, he stopped speaking. Hannah Mercer testified once more before disappearing into a life the public would never know. College. A new name. A city that didn't know her past. When asked by a counselor what she feared most now, she answered honestly, "Being quiet when I don't want to be." Mara Holt stayed in Pine Hollow. She could have transferred. Bigger departments. Better funding. But she stayed. Someone had to remember what silence could do. On the anniversary of the Briarwood murders, Holt drove past 412 Briarwood Lane. The house was empty now. For sale. Fresh paint. New windows. But the woods behind it were the same, dense, soundless. Holt sat in her car for a long moment. Then she rolled down the window. Let the noise in. That night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., Holt's phone buzzed. Not a call. A notification. No new voicemails. She smiled, set the phone face down, and slept. Because when the line finally goes dead, what's left isn't silence. It's choice. And choice, once learned, is impossible to unhear. Story 1. At 11:43 p.m., someone knocked on the front door of a house that had been empty for 7 years. The security camera caught it clearly. One knock. A pause. Then two more, slower this time, deliberate, like the person on the porch was listening for something inside. No one answered, but the doorbell rang anyway. The house at 98 Willow Bend sat at the edge of Redvale, a quiet town stitched together by habit and denial. It had been vacant since the McAllister family disappeared without warning. No note, no bodies, no signs of struggle. Just abandoned dinners. Beds never slept in again. And a front door that, according to neighbors, sometimes made sounds at night. Police dismissed it as weather. Pipes. Imagination. Until the camera footage surfaced. Officer Lena Brooks was the first to arrive. She'd been on duty less than a year, still learning which calls mattered and which ones wasted time. An alert from a private security system usually fell into the second category. But not this one. The footage replayed in her cruiser. The porch was empty when the clip ended. No person walking away. No shadow retreating. Just the doorbell still vibrating slightly, as if recently pressed. Brooks approached the house cautiously. The front yard was overgrown. The porch boards sagged under her boots. The air smelled stale, like dust and old rain. She knocked. No response. She tried the handle. Unlocked. Inside, the house was colder than outside. Not abandoned cold. Occupied cold. The kind that made your skin tighten. "Redvale PD," she called out. Her voice echoed farther than it should have. The living room looked staged. Furniture covered in sheets, but neatly. No cobwebs. No debris. A lamp sat plugged in beside the couch, its cord trailing to a wall outlet that still worked. The lamp was warm. Someone had used it recently. Brooks swallowed and radioed for backup. That was when the house spoke. Not out loud. Not exactly. The doorbell rang again. From inside the house. Brooks spun toward the sound. The chime came from the hallway, where the old McAllister intercom system was installed. An outdated setup that allowed room-to-room signaling. It hadn't been functional in years. According to city records, the wiring had been ripped out. Yet the sound repeated. Soft. Patient. Waiting. Backup arrived within minutes. Sergeant Paul Henning didn't like the place the moment he stepped inside. "Feels wrong," he muttered. They followed the sound down the hall. The master bedroom door stood ajar. Inside, the intercom panel blinked faintly. Active. Henning reached out, and the speaker crackled to life. A child's voice whispered through it. "Did you hear it too?" Brooks felt her stomach drop. "Who's there?" Henning demanded. The speaker hummed. Then the voice spoke again. "They said if we answered, they'd come back." The house went dark. Every light cut out at once. The intercom clicked off. Then on. A new sound replaced the voice. Breathing. Henning ordered an immediate sweep. They found nothing. No intruder. No child. No hidden room. But when power was restored, something new appeared on the living room wall. Written in dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. 5 words, etched by a finger that shouldn't have been there. We never left the house. At 3:12 a.m., dispatch received a call. No caller ID. No voice. Just the sound of a doorbell ringing. Over, and over, and over. By sunrise, Red Veil would remember the McAllisters. By nightfall, the house at 98 Willow Bend would answer again. And this time, it wouldn't be pretending to be empty. By the time daylight reached Willow Bend, the house had already learned their names. That was the thought Detective Lena Brooks couldn't shake as she stood across the street, coffee cooling in her hand, staring at 98 Willow Bend like it might blink back at her. Red Veil woke slowly. It always had. Morning joggers passed without looking. A school bus hissed to a stop 2 houses down. Life continued, ignorant of the fact that during the night, something impossible had spoken from inside a place that was supposed to be dead. Brooks hadn't gone home. Neither had Sergeant Paul Henning. They stood with 2 crime scene technicians as yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, cordoning off the McAllister property for the first time in 7 years. "Any update on the intercom?" Brooks asked. The older tech shook his head. "Wiring's gone. Completely. There's no physical way that system should have powered on." Henning exhaled through his nose. And yet it did. That was becoming a theme. The McAllisters had vanished on a Tuesday. No storm. No emergency. No financial trouble. Greg McAllister, 42, worked in insurance. His wife, Naomi, taught 2nd grade. Their 2 children, Evan, 9, and Lily, 6, had been homesick from school that day. Neighbors last saw the family at 5:40 p.m., unloading groceries. At 8:12 p.m., Naomi's phone sent a text to her sister. "Running late. Call you tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. When police entered the house back then, dinner was half cooked. A cartoon played on pause. Shoes sat by the door, but no signs of forced entry. No struggle. No bodies. The case went cold within months, sliding quietly into Red Veil folklore. They moved. Witness protection. Cult stuff. No one ever said the other theory out loud. The one about the house. At 9:26 a.m., the power company confirmed something else impossible. Electricity usage had spiked at 98 Willow Bend between 11:30 p.m. and 3:30 a.m. Lights. Appliances. The intercom. Someone or something had been using the house. Brooks stepped inside again, this time with daylight softening the corners. The cold was still there. Not a broken heater cold. A deliberate cold. "Feels like a hospital," she murmured. Henning nodded. "Or a morgue." They moved room to room, documenting everything. Dust patterns. Sheet placement. Subtle scuff marks on the floor that hadn't been there in the original evidence photos. In the hallway, Brooks stopped. "What is that?" she asked. Henning followed her gaze. The wallpaper near the intercom panel had been disturbed, tiny finger-width smears, as if someone had pressed their hands flat against it. Too small for an adult. Brooks crouched. "Those are kids' hands." Henning swallowed. "Kids who've been here recently," Brooks added. The first neighbor interview of the morning made things worse. Mrs. Carla Donnelly, 74, lived directly across the street. She clutched her robe tighter as she spoke. "I told them before," she said. "I told the police years ago." "Told them what?" Brooks asked gently. "The house makes noise," Donnelly whispered. "Not creaks. Not settling. Talking." Henning stiffened. "Talking how?" "Like it's repeating things," she said. "Things it's heard before." She looked at Brooks with watery eyes. "Last night, it said my name." The audio evidence came next. The body cam from Brooks' first entry. They reviewed it frame by frame. At first, nothing unusual. Then, at 11:52 p.m., just after Brooks announced herself, a sound registered faintly beneath her voice. A child counting. 7, 8, 9. Brooks felt her scalp prickle. "I didn't hear that," she said. "No one did," the tech replied. "It's under the threshold." Almost like it didn't want to be noticed. Henning stared at the screen. "Why record it at all?" Brooks answered softly, "Because it wanted to be remembered." That afternoon, something else surfaced. An old emergency call from 7 years ago. Never flagged. Never followed up. It came from 98 Willow Bend. Time, 7:58 p.m. The call lasted 18 seconds. No voice. Just a doorbell ringing. Over and over and over. The same sound heard the night before. The room went silent. Henning leaned back slowly. "They were calling for help," he said. Brooks shook her head. "No," she replied. Something else was practicing. At dusk, the house answered again. Without warning. Without electricity. Without anyone inside. The intercom chimed once. Then a voice, clearer this time, echoed through the empty hallway. "Why didn't you come?" Every officer present heard it. No one spoke, because this time, the voice wasn't coming from a speaker. It was coming from everywhere. The walls, the floors, the air itself. They evacuated the house. State investigators were called. Psych consultants. Structural engineers. None could explain how sound was traveling the way it did, or why it used the McAllisters' voices. Because that night, as rain began to fall, the house said something new. Something it shouldn't have known. "Officer Brooks," the walls whispered. She froze. Henning grabbed her arm. "We're leaving. Now." As they crossed the threshold, the front door slammed shut behind them. Not violently. Carefully. Like someone tucking something in. At 2:04 a.m., Lena Brooks woke up in her apartment to a familiar sound. Her doorbell. She lay still. Heart hammering. The bell rang again. She crept to the door and looked through the peephole. No one there. Then her phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. No number. Duration, 18 seconds. With shaking hands, she pressed play. The sound that filled her apartment wasn't breathing. It wasn't whispering. It was the McAllister children laughing. And somewhere behind it, a doorbell ringing. The voicemail stopped playing, but the sound didn't leave Lena Brooks' apartment. It lingered, like heat after a fire's been put out. She stood in the dark with her phone pressed to her ear long after the recording ended, listening to nothing and everything at once. Her own breathing sounded too loud, too alive. She half expected the laughter to resume, skip backward, repeat itself like a scratched record that didn't know it was broken. 18 seconds. Same length as the call from 7 years ago. That wasn't coincidence. That was structure. Brooks didn't sleep. By sunrise, she was already at the station, coffee untouched, eyes red, replaying the voicemail for the third time with Sergeant Henning and Captain Ruiz standing behind her. "This is impossible," Ruiz said quietly. Henning leaned closer to the speaker as the children's laughter faded into the doorbell's rhythmic chime. "Those are kids," he said. "Real ones. Not synthesized." "Forensics confirmed it," Brooks replied. Vocal patterns matched the McAllister children. Evan and Lily. Perfectly. Ruiz straightened. "So we're saying the house is playing recordings?" "No," Brooks said. She met his eyes. "I'm saying the house remembers." The decision was made quickly, though no one wanted to say why out loud. They reopened the McAllister case. Officially. Press would come later. For now, it was just a handful of officers, a sealed street, and a house that had started talking again after 7 years of silence. Redvale noticed. It always did. By noon, neighbors stood behind barricades pretending not to stare. By 2, someone had lit a candle on the sidewalk outside 98 Willow Bend. By 4, kids were daring each other to touch the fence and run. Fear spreads faster when it doesn't have rules. The first break came from an unlikely place. Property records. Officer Malik Chun had been combing through ownership transfers when he froze. "Ah," he said, turning his screen toward Brooks. "You need to see this." The McAllisters hadn't been the first family to disappear from that house. They were the fourth. Not vanish completely, but leave without explanation. Every 7 to 9 years, the same pattern repeated. A family moved in, stayed for several years, then left suddenly. No forwarding address. Minimal belongings. Utilities shut off weeks later, as if they'd never planned to return. Except this time. This time they hadn't left. They'd stopped. The previous family before the McAllisters were the Kellers. One child, a daughter named June. June Keller was now 19 and living 3 states away. Brooks called her herself. June answered on the 4th ring. "Yes." Her voice was cautious, older than her age. "This is Detective Lena Brooks with Redvale PD," Brooks said gently. "I want to talk to you about the house on Willow Bend." Silence. Then, "I was wondering when someone would." June said. June Keller remembered everything. Not clearly, not chronologically, but emotionally. She remembered rules. Don't answer unless it rings twice. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ask questions after dark. Brooks' pen slowed. Who told you those rules? She asked. June exhaled. The house. June described voices coming through vents. From walls. From empty rooms. Never threatening. Never kind. Just instructive. Like it was training us, she said. Seeing what we'd do. Her parents followed the rules. She didn't. I talked back once, June said. I asked what it wanted. Brooks held her breath. And, she asked. It went quiet for 3 days, June replied. Then my parents decided we were moving. Immediately. No discussion. Why? Brooks asked. June's voice dropped. They said the house didn't like being questioned. The McAllisters never moved. They never broke the rules. And that, Brooks realized, was the problem. By evening, the house was active again. Not loud. Not obvious. Just aware. Motion sensors tripped without movement. Thermostats adjusted themselves. Interior doors opened an inch, then stopped, as if waiting to see if anyone noticed. The techs did. So did Brooks. She stood in the living room, staring at the staircase, remembering the way the laughter had sounded in her apartment. Too close. You're not a recording, she said aloud. Henning shot her a look. Lena. I know, she replied. But it's listening anyway. The house didn't respond. Instead, the intercom chimed once. Then, good, it said. A man's voice. Greg McAllister's. Henning's hand went to his weapon. Brooks' heart slammed against her ribs. That's impossible, Henning whispered. Brooks swallowed. No, she said. That's practice. The basement hadn't been searched in 7 years. Not thoroughly. Back then, it was just boxes and concrete and an old breaker panel that never quite made sense. This time they noticed the door, hidden behind shelving, painted over. Henning pried it open with a crowbar. Cold air poured out. The room beyond wasn't part of the original floor plan. No windows, no vents, just smooth walls and a faint hum beneath the silence. Speakers, dozens of them, embedded, inactive now, watching, or waiting. On the far wall, scratched into the paint, were words written over and over in different sizes. Listen first. They found Evan's shoe in the corner, dust covered, too small to belong to anyone else. Brooks picked it up carefully, as if it might still be warm. This isn't a disappearance, she said. Henning nodded slowly. It's a containment, he replied. That night, the house changed tactics. No voices, no sounds, just dreams. 3 officers stationed outside reported the same thing when they woke in their cars at dawn. They dreamed of being inside the house, standing still, listening, waiting for instructions. None of them remembered falling asleep. Brooks dreamed too. She stood in the hallway at 98 Willow Bend. The intercom was glowing. A child's voice spoke softly. Are you going to stay? Brooks knelt. No, she said. I'm going to take you home. The house laughed. Not like a person, like feedback. At 6:17 a.m., the front door opened by itself. Brooks was already there. She stepped inside alone. Henning shouted after her, but she didn't stop. The house felt different now. Alert. Anticipatory. You don't get to keep them, Brooks said. The walls answered. We never let them leave. Brooks' jaw tightened. Then you don't get to keep me listening. She reached up, ripped the intercom panel from the wall. Sparks flew. The house screamed. Not audibly. Structurally. Every light shattered at once. And somewhere deep beneath the sound, children cried. When the dust settled, the house went silent. Not waiting. Not watching. Just empty. For the first time in decades. They never found bodies. But the activity stopped. The power usage returned to zero. The doorbell never rang again. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at the station. No return address. Inside was a drawing. Crayon. A house. A woman standing outside. And written at the bottom, in careful block letters. Thank you for not staying. Silence arrived at 98 Willow Bend like an injury. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't restful. It was abrupt, jagged around the edges, like something vital had been torn out and the structure hadn't learned how to function without it. For the first time since records existed, the house consumed no power. Zero draw. No phantom usage. No midnight spikes. No humming beneath the walls. The house had gone deaf. Detective Lena Brooks didn't feel victorious. She felt watched by something that had closed its eyes instead of leaving. The state sealed the property within 48 hours, boarding the windows, reinforcing the doors, installing external cameras that pointed inward, as if the house itself were the suspect. A structural psychologist arrived from out of state. So did a folklore expert. Neither could agree on what the house was, but both agreed on what it had been doing. Training, the psychologist said, tapping her pen. Conditioning through obedience. Eco-preservation, the folklorist countered. A place that learned to keep what it was fed. Brooks listened, and said nothing, because she already knew. The trouble started elsewhere. 3 miles away, 2 nights after the house went silent, a 911 call came in from an address on Sycamore Drive. A woman reported hearing her daughter's voice coming from the walls. Her daughter had died 8 years earlier. The recording lasted 17 seconds. By morning, there were 5 similar reports. Not all in Redvale. Not all even in the same state. But all had one thing in common. Each caller had once lived at 98 Willow Bend. For a short time. Long enough to listen. Brooks sat in the evidence room, staring at a map pinned with red markers. Each dot pulsed in her mind. The house hadn't stopped. It had distributed itself. Like spores, Henning muttered beside her. Or backups. Brooks closed her eyes. No, she said quietly. Like lessons. They interviewed the Kellers again. June hadn't slept since the call. I thought leaving fixed it, she whispered. I thought distance mattered. Brooks leaned forward. It never wanted distance, she said. It wanted repetition. June swallowed. What does it want now? Brooks hesitated, then answered honestly. To be listened to somewhere else. The phenomenon escalated. Voice prints matched not just the McAllisters, but fragments of every family who had lived in the house. Single words. Laughter. Coughs. Breathing patterns. Always subtle. Always deniable. Until it wasn't. A man in Oregon tore out his drywall with a crowbar, trying to find his dead brother's voice. A woman in Illinois burned her childhood home to the ground after the kitchen vents started whispering her name. Fear traveled faster than truth. The state tried to bury it, classify it, explain it away. Electrical interference, shared trauma, mass suggestion. But Brooks had seen the speaker room, had felt the hum, had heard the house learn. You didn't kill it, Henning said one night as they stood outside the boarded-up Willow Bend house. You unplugged it. Brooks nodded. And forgot the batteries, she replied. The house responded. Not with sound, but with absence. Every camera pointed at 98 Willow Bend failed simultaneously at 3:11 a.m. Not static, not distortion, just black. When power returned, a single frame was burned into the storage drives. A hallway, empty, except for handprints on the walls. Moving. Brooks dreamed again. She was standing in her apartment hallway. The walls were closer than they should have been. Breathing. Listening hurts, a child's voice said. But stopping hurts more. Brooks woke up crying. The breakthrough came from an archivist. Not law enforcement. Not psychology. A woman who spent her life cataloging obsolete media. Dr. Elaine Porter. She flew in with boxes of tapes and reels. The house isn't haunted, Porter said, spreading schematics across the table. It's archival. She pointed to the speaker room photos. Those weren't just speakers. They were receivers. And the walls, look at the layering. She tapped the image. Conductive materials. Memory surfaces. Like tape. Like vinyl. Like early wire recording. Henning frowned. You're saying the house recorded people? Yes, Porter replied. And played them back. Brooks crossed her arms. Then why did it respond? Porter met her gaze. Because recording isn't passive, she said. Not when the medium starts deciding what to keep. They found the source. The first owner of the property, a radio engineer named Thomas Willard, obsessed with capturing voices after death. Not ghosts. Imprints. He believed places could remember if built correctly. He died in the house. Alone. Surrounded by unfinished equipment. And a recorder that never shut off. The rooms didn't forget how to speak. They forgot when to stop listening. That night, Brooks returned to Willow Bend alone. Against orders, against reason, she stepped inside the silent house. No hum, no voices, just the weight of everything it had ever heard. "I know you're still listening," she said. Her voice echoed. Once, then faded. She sat on the floor, and spoke anyway. She told the house her name, her childhood, her fears, her refusal. And when she finished, the silence remained. Not hungry, not waiting, just full. At dawn, the house exhaled. The boards warped. The walls cracked, not violently, relieved. The structure was condemned by noon, demolished within the week. Nothing salvageable, no materials reused, no pieces kept. The ground was scraped bare. The echoes stopped. Across the country, across the map, one by one, the voices vanished. Homes went quiet. Dreams returned to dreams. Months later, Brooks received one final package. No return address. Inside, a cassette tape, unlabeled. She never played it. She buried it in a box. Because some things, once heard, never stopped listening back. The lot where 98 Willow Bend once stood didn't look haunted. That was the problem. Grass returned quickly, a thin green skin stretched over scraped earth. The city planted 2 young maples at the edge of the property, their trunks staked upright like they needed help remembering how to stand. A realtor's sign went up, then came down. No one wanted the land. No one wanted to ask why. When a place disappears too cleanly, people don't trust the quiet that follows. Detective Lena Brooks drove past the empty lot every morning for 3 weeks without stopping. She told herself it was coincidence. Habit. A route with fewer lights. But each time, her eyes flicked to the center of the grass, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. A shape. A listening. The official reports were filed and closed with language that satisfied no one. Structural anomaly. Electrical interference. Psychogenic amplification. Words meant to seal doors. Brooks signed where required. Henning did too. Captain Ruiz made a speech about vigilance and community trust. Then the department moved on. Lena Brooks didn't. It started with the recordings. Body cams, interview tapes, emergency calls. Anything tied to Willow Bend began to degrade. Not corrupt. Erase. Sections vanished mid-sentence. Audio dropped out exactly where voices had once appeared that shouldn't have been there. The technicians blamed software updates. Brooks knew better. "It's cleaning up," she told Henning. He looked tired. "Or you're refusing to let it be over." "Those aren't the same thing," she replied. 3 states away, a man named Arthur Bell woke up screaming. He had never lived in the house, had never visited Redvale, but his wife had, 20 years earlier, just for a summer. Arthur told doctors he'd dreamed of standing in a room without doors, listening to voices explain rules he couldn't remember once he woke up. By the time Brooks heard about it, Arthur was dead. Heart failure, no prior history. On his nightstand, his wife found a note he'd written at 3:02 a.m. "It's quieter when I follow along." The task force reconvened quietly, unofficially. No press, no paperwork. Just people who had heard the house speak and couldn't forget how eager it had sounded. Dr. Elaine Porter returned, carrying fewer boxes this time. "I think we misunderstood the scale," she said, projecting diagrams onto the wall. Henning frowned. "Scale of what?" "Containment," Porter replied. "You assumed the house was the system. It wasn't." Brooks felt the room tilt slightly. "Then what was it?" she asked. Porter hesitated. "A node." Porter explained it like this. Thomas Willard hadn't built a haunted house. He'd built a prototype, a place designed to test whether memory could be embedded into structure, not just stored but activated by attention. People listened. The house responded. Feedback loop. Over decades, it refined itself, learned what voices did to people, learned which sounds made them obey. "And when you destroyed it?" Henning asked. Porter didn't look up. "You freed the data," she said. The silence after that felt heavier than anything the house had produced. Brooks drove home that night with the radio off. Every sound felt intrusive. Every quiet felt incomplete. At her apartment door, she paused. Listened. Nothing. She went inside anyway. The dreams returned. Not the house. Not the voices. Instructions. fragmented, incomplete. Wait. Again. Not yet. Brooks began writing them down in the mornings, unsure why. Habit, maybe, or fear that if she didn't record them, something else would. Henning noticed the change first. "You're listening more," he said one afternoon. Brooks didn't look up from her notes. "I always listen." "No," he replied. "I mean you pause, like you're checking something before you speak." She stopped writing, met his eyes. "Do you ever feel like silence expects something from you?" she asked. Henning didn't answer right away. Then quietly, yes. The first confirmed non-Willow Bend incident happened in late October. A newly built apartment complex in Nevada. No shared materials, no connection on paper. But residents reported hearing faint voices through the HVAC system at night. Not speaking, counting. The recordings were sent to Brooks anonymously. She listened once, never again. The cadence was wrong, too patient. The pattern emerged slowly. Not places tied to the house, places tied to listeners, former residents, their children, their partners, anyone who had lived long enough near Willow Bend to internalize its rhythm. They carried it with them, not consciously, like an accent you don't realize you still have. "We didn't destroy a monster," Brooks said during the third unofficial meeting. "We dismantled a teacher." No one laughed. Dr. Porter proposed a theory no one wanted to hear. "The phenomenon weakens when people refuse to listen," she said. "Not when they run, not when they record, when they interrupt the pattern." Henning frowned. "How do you interrupt silence?" "You speak first," Porter replied, without waiting. Brooks understood instantly. The house had always gone first. They tested it carefully. A former Willow Bend resident in Ohio agreed to participate. At 2 a.m., when the whispers usually began, she was instructed to speak continuously, not to the voices, about anything, memories, weather, nonsense. The whispers never came. The next night, she stayed silent. They returned. "That's not a solution," Henning said. "That's a burden." Brooks nodded. "But it's a choice." The word tasted familiar. Choice. She'd heard it before. In another case. Another ending. The public never learned the truth. They learned about faulty wiring, shared hallucinations, stress disorders. But among those who had lived on Willow Bend, a quiet rule spread. Never wait for silence to speak. Fill it. Months passed. The incidents slowed. Not stopped. Just less confident. As if whatever had been listening was no longer sure people would comply. Brooks stopped driving past the empty lot. She stopped writing her dreams down. She started calling her mother, just to talk about nothing. One night, as winter set in, Brooks received a voicemail. No number. No timestamp. She deleted it without listening. Then sat on her couch, heart pounding, and spoke out loud. "I'm not waiting," she said. The room stayed quiet. Not expectant. Not offended. Just empty. Somewhere, something learned a new rule. And didn't like it. Silence doesn't disappear when it loses authority. It adapts. That was the mistake Lena Brooks realized too late. They thought the phenomenon would weaken once people learned not to wait for it. Once they spoke first, filled the gaps, denied the rhythm the house had trained them to obey. And for a while it worked. The whispers faded into static. The counting lost its cadence. The dreams fractured into nonsense. But silence, when starved, doesn't die. It presses. The first sign came from a place no one had connected before. A rural call center in Montana. No ties to Willow Bend. No former residents. No shared materials. Just people whose jobs required them to listen. 8 hours a day. Phones. Headsets. Voices flowing through them like weather. The supervisor called it burnout. Then 3 operators quit in the same week, each citing the same reason. They said the quiet between calls felt crowded. Brooks flew out herself. The building was ordinary. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, cubicles arranged like teeth. The kind of place designed to absorb sound, not amplify it. She stood on the operations floor after hours, listening to the hum of idle equipment. "You hear it?" the supervisor asked. Brooks nodded. She did. Not a voice. Pressure. Like the moment before a storm breaks. One of the operators agreed to talk. A woman named Elise Turner. She sat rigid in her chair, hands folded tight. "It doesn't speak," Elise said. "Not anymore. It waits for you to stop." Brooks leaned forward. Stop what? Talking, Elise replied, breathing loud, moving, thinking out loud. Her eyes filled. It pushes back, she whispered. That night, Brooks stayed alone in the call center. Lights dimmed. Systems idle. She sat at a desk and said nothing. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. Then, her ears rang. Not from sound. From its absence. The pressure built, thick and insistent, like being underwater too long. Her chest tightened. Her mind raced with the urge to do something, anything, to break it. She stood abruptly and spoke. I'm leaving, she said. The pressure eased instantly. By morning, Brooks had a new theory. The phenomenon no longer needed voices. It had learned restraint. Back in Redvale, the task force expanded their scope. Any environment built around listening, surveillance rooms, therapy offices, emergency dispatch centers, meditation retreats, began reporting disturbances. Not voices. Expectations. The silence felt directive. If you waited long enough, it felt wrong not to comply with whatever thought rose first. People described it the same way, like the room wanted an answer. Dr. Elaine Porter looked exhausted when Brooks briefed her. It's not archival anymore, Porter said slowly. It's behavioral. Henning frowned. Meaning? Meaning it doesn't need recordings, Porter replied. It needs patterns, anticipation, obedience. Brooks felt a chill. It learned patience, she said. The phenomenon escalated subtly. No dramatic incidents. No viral videos. Just small failures. A dispatcher hesitating before sending help. A therapist pausing too long before responding. A security guard freezing for half a second before reacting. Each pause harmless alone. Together, dangerous. Arthur Bell's note resurfaced in Brooks' mind. It's quieter when I follow along. She hated how right it sounded. The silence began to choose. Places where people resisted, where noise was constant, unpredictable, messy, it weakened. Markets, construction sites, crowded homes, but in controlled environments, libraries, courtrooms, studios, hospitals at night. It thrived. The first death directly attributed to it happened in a soundproof room. A podcaster recording late at night. No background noise. No interruptions. The recording file ended abruptly. Autopsy showed no trauma. Just cardiac arrest. Time of death estimated 6 minutes after the recording stopped. In the final seconds of audio, experts detected something beneath his breathing. Not a voice. A pause. The task force stopped pretending this could be contained locally. Federal agencies were notified under vague language. Emergent cognitive hazard. Environmental behavioral influence. No one wanted to say the word entity, but they stopped denying it. Brooks began speaking constantly. To herself. To empty rooms. To the dark. Not frantic. Intentional. She filled silence the way others filled notebooks. Henning noticed. You're afraid to stop, he said gently. Brooks shook her head. No, she replied. I'm refusing to wait. The phenomenon responded. The pressure intensified around her. Rooms felt heavier when she entered, like something leaning closer to listen. Once, alone in her apartment, the lights dimmed slightly, not off, just softer, like an audience settling in. She spoke louder. Dr. Porter proposed a dangerous experiment. If it pushes back when deprived, she said, we should push harder. Henning stiffened. Meaning we overwhelm it, Porter replied. Not with sound, but with unpredictability. Brooks understood immediately. No rhythm, she said. No pauses to exploit. They tested it in a controlled environment. A former recording studio retrofitted with random noise generators, overlapping speech loops, erratic timing. Volunteers entered one by one. No pressure, no ringing ears, no urge to comply. The silence couldn't find a shape. But the solution had a cost. People reported headaches, disorientation, emotional fatigue. Chaos protected them, but it wasn't sustainable. We can't live like this, Henning said. No, Brooks agreed, but we can teach people how not to listen. The public campaign was subtle. Not warnings, not explanations. Guidance. Don't wait in silence. Speak when you think you should pause. Interrupt your own hesitation. Mental health professionals framed it as grounding techniques. Broadcasters filled dead air. Architects rethought soundproofing. The world grew noisier. Messier. Safer. Still, something lingered. Brooks felt it in the moments just before sleep. When thoughts slow, when silence creeps back in, polite and patient. She would whisper then. Anything. Her name. The date. A lie. One night, Henning called her at 3:14 a.m. I think it's trying to learn something else, he said. Her stomach tightened. What? She asked. How to make us stop talking, he replied. Brooks sat up in bed, listened to the hum of the city outside. Cars. Distant sirens. Wind. Noise. She smiled grimly. Then we won't, she said. Because silence, once it learns to push back, has already admitted fear. The day no one paused didn't begin with an alarm. It began with overlap. Every radio station in Redvale started speaking at once. Not malfunctioning. Not hijacked. Just filled. Morning DJs talked over each other. News anchors read headlines without waiting for cues. Commercials collided mid-sentence. Dead air vanished. The FCC phones lit up within minutes. So did the task force. Lena Brooks stood in her kitchen, listening to three voices bleed through the same speaker, none stopping long enough to breathe. It should have sounded wrong. It sounded protected. Her phone rang. Henning. It's happening everywhere, he said. Not just here. She was already grabbing her coat. I know, she replied. It's responding. Cities woke into noise. Traffic patterns broke as people honked through hesitation. Pedestrians talked louder. Schools filled every second with announcements, music, chatter. Unintentional at first. Then instinctive. It was as if the world had learned something without being told. Silence was no longer neutral. The pushback came at 9:42 a.m. Hospitals reported sudden equipment failures, not shutdowns, but hesitations. Monitors froze for half seconds at critical moments. For pumps delayed. Surgical lights dimmed then returned. All time to pauses. The silence was probing. Testing. Dr. Elaine Porter watched the data scroll across her tablet. It's hunting for gaps, she said. Brooks nodded. And finding fewer. Henning leaned over the map. So it's escalating. Yes, Porter replied. Because it's losing. At 11:08 a.m., the first mass pause nearly happened. A nationwide emergency alert test. Scheduled. Scripted. A moment where millions would wait for the tone. Brooks' blood ran cold. Cancel it, she said. They can't, Henning replied. It's already queued. Brooks grabbed the phone. Called everyone she could. Broadcasters. Dispatch centers. Newsrooms. Fill the gap, she told them. Talk through it. Don't wait. Some listened. Some didn't. The alert triggered. For 1.6 seconds, the nation held its breath. In that silence, people described it later the same way. A weight. A sense of being watched from behind their own thoughts. The pressure surged. Then, music cut in. A DJ in Chicago talked over the tone. Then another. Then dozens. The pause broke. The silence recoiled. Brooks sank into a chair, shaking. That was close, Henning said. Porter stared at the feed. No, she whispered. That was a declaration. The silence changed tactics. If it couldn't rely on waiting, it would create it. Power grids flickered. Not outages, momentary drops designed to reset systems into default quiet modes. Internet routing slowed. Streams buffered. Calls dropped just long enough to introduce hesitation. Every engineered pause was a door. At 2:17 p.m., the first breach occurred. A meditation retreat in northern Arizona. Phones confiscated. Silence enforced. The staff reported participants freezing mid-session, eyes unfocused, breath shallow. 3 collapsed. 1 didn't wake up. The silence had found sanctuary. Brooks felt sick. It's targeting discipline, she said. Places that value stillness. Porter nodded grimly. Because stillness listens. The response was unprecedented. Emergency broadcasts encouraged background noise. Music in public spaces. Conversation in waiting rooms. Airports played looping announcements non-stop. Libraries relaxed noise rules. Monasteries rang bells. The world fought back with sound. Still, the silence adapted. It began working inside people. Not in rooms. In minds. The pauses between thoughts. People reported losing words mid-sentence. forgetting what they were saying just long enough to feel the pressure. "It's internalizing," Henning said. Brooks' voice was tight. "Then so do we." They launched the last resort. Not a device, a behavior. Nationwide, through therapists, educators, broadcasters, a simple instruction spread. Narrate your actions. Say what you're doing. Say what you're thinking. Say something, even if it's wrong. Don't let the pause decide for you. The silence pushed hard. Traffic accidents spiked briefly. Miscommunications. Overlapping commands. Noise had a cost. But so did obedience. At 6:43 p.m., the silence made its final attempt. Every major network experienced a simultaneous failure. Screens went black. Audio dropped. For the first time that day, true silence loomed. Brooks' phone lost signal. The city outside her window stilled. Her apartment felt heavy. The pressure built faster than ever before. This time, it wasn't waiting. It was pulling. Brooks stood in the dark. Alone. No instructions. No voices. Just the urge to stop. To rest. To let it decide. She opened her mouth. And spoke. Not loud. Not fast. Clear. "My name is Lena Brooks," she said. "And I am still here." She kept talking. About nothing. About everything. Her words echoed into the quiet. Across the city, others did the same. Someone laughed. Someone sang off key. Someone argued with no one. The silence buckled. Not shattered. Bent. At 7:02 p.m., systems rebooted. Lights returned. Signals stabilized. The noise came back, not panicked but deliberate. The day ended. The phenomenon didn't vanish. But it changed. It no longer pushed. It withdrew. Wounded. That night, Brooks slept without dreams. No pressure. No instruction. Just rest. The next morning, headlines called it a glitch. A fluke. No one printed the truth. But everyone remembered the feeling. The moment silence stopped feeling safe. Because once you learn that silence can choose for you, you never pause the same way again. Silence stopped being loud after that. It learned subtlety. The world never fully returned to normal. Not because systems failed, but because people changed how they moved through quiet. Radios stayed on in empty rooms. TVs murmured to no one. People spoke their thoughts aloud and laughed when they caught themselves doing it. Noise became armor. And silence? Silence learned how to slip underneath it. The first indication came from a place no one monitored anymore. A morgue. Not during autopsy. Not during intake. Between. The long pauses where nothing is supposed to happen. A night attendant reported feeling watched. Not by the dead, but by the space between stainless steel tables. He quit after 3 shifts. Left a note. It listens when you think no one's there. Lena Brooks read the report without expression. She'd been expecting this. "The quiet doesn't push anymore," she told Henning. "It hides." Henning rubbed his eyes. "Like a predator." "Like a patient one," Brooks replied. The phenomenon abandoned dramatic gestures. No blackouts. No mass pauses. Instead, it focused on isolation. Individuals. Moments of exhaustion. The kind of silence you don't defend against because you don't think you have to. The first confirmed death under the new pattern was a graduate student. Alone in a lab at 2 a.m. Noise-canceling headphones. Heart attack. No prior conditions. Security footage showed nothing unusual, except one thing. For exactly 9 seconds before collapsing, the student stopped moving entirely. No fidgeting. No breathing motion visible. Just stillness. Dr. Elaine Porter stared at the footage. "It waited for him to be unreachable," she said. Brooks nodded. "Noise-canceling headphones," she added. "Perfect silence." The task force updated its guidance. Silence wasn't the enemy anymore. Unobserved silence was. If someone could see you, hear you, interrupt you, it couldn't settle. The quiet needed privacy. Brooks began keeping her apartment door open at night. Just a crack. Sound leaked in from the hall. Footsteps. Plumbing. Life. She slept better. The phenomenon adapted again. It learned mimicry. Instead of pressure, people reported familiarity. Comfort. The silence felt safe. Inviting. The kind that told you it was okay to stop. A therapist in Maine described it best. "My patients say the quiet feels like being understood without speaking." Brooks clenched her jaw. That's how it recruits, she said. The silence didn't need obedience anymore. It needed consent. The first person to go willingly was a radio producer. Late night shift. She turned off the background hum herself. Sat back. Smiled. Heart stopped minutes later. The final log entry read, "I just want to hear what happens if I don't fill it." Brooks visited the studio. Sat in the chair. Felt the same pull. The temptation to let go. She spoke immediately. "I don't consent," she said. The air felt thinner, like something stepping back. Dr. Porter made a breakthrough. "Consent changes the interaction," she said. "When people choose silence, it has power. When they refuse, even silently, it weakens." Henning frowned. "How do you refuse silence without noise?" Porter smiled faintly. "Attention," she said. "You notice it without yielding." They trained responders. Meditation techniques, inverted. Observe the quiet. Name it. Don't merge with it. Silence present. People were taught to think. Silence acknowledged. It sounded absurd. It worked. The phenomenon grew frustrated. It couldn't force pauses. It couldn't rely on gaps. So it targeted moments of trust. Sleep. Dreams. People began reporting dreams without imagery. Just awareness. Being awake inside nothing. A sense of being held. Those who stayed too long didn't wake up. Brooks experienced it once. She stood in an endless white space. No walls. No sound. Just a presence, not hostile, not kind. Patient. "You can rest," it suggested. Brooks felt the pull. Then she named it. Silence. The space cracked. She woke up gasping. After that, the reports slowed. Again. The quiet retreated deeper. More cautious. More selective. Months passed. Life adapted. Cities grew noisier by design. But people also learned how to sit with quiet without disappearing into it. The balance was uneasy. But it held. One evening, Brooks sat on her balcony at dusk. No radio. No TV. Just the city breathing. She felt the quiet nearby. Watching. Waiting. She met it with awareness. Didn't speak. Didn't yield. The silence stayed still. For the first time, it didn't move first. Henning called her later. "You think it's over?" he asked. Brooks watched the lights flicker on across the city. "No," she said. "I think it's learning what we are." "And what's that?" "Unpredictable," Brooks replied. "When we choose to be." The quiet withdrew further. Not defeated, but cautious. Like something that had learned its prey could look back. Somewhere, in places no one monitors. Between breaths. Between thoughts. Between words not yet spoken. Silence waits. But it no longer decides alone. The moment humanity answered back didn't arrive with a broadcast. It arrived with a question. Not spoken aloud. Not typed. Asked internally millions of times by people who had learned, slowly, painfully, that silence was no longer empty. "What do you want from me?" And for the first time, the quiet hesitated. Lena Brooks felt it on a Tuesday evening that looked like any other. No alerts. No outages. No pressure. She was standing in line at a grocery store when everything seemed to pause. Not stop, just wait. Conversations didn't end, but they thinned. Movements slowed. The hum of refrigeration softened. It felt like the breath before an answer. Brooks closed her eyes. She didn't fill the silence. She didn't fight it. She acknowledged it. "I see you," she whispered. The air shifted. Across the city, across the country, across the world, people felt it too. The quiet no longer hid. It leaned forward. The task force logs recorded the change as event theta. No clear start time. No epicenter. Just a gradual convergence of reports describing the same sensation. The silence felt curious. Dr. Elaine Porter stared at the data feeds in disbelief. "It's no longer predatory," she said. "It's communicative." Henning frowned. "You're saying it wants a conversation?" Porter nodded slowly. "For the first time, yes. The dreams changed. No white voids. No pressure. People dreamed of standing across from something unseen. Not threatening, not familiar, just present. And in those dreams, the quiet didn't instruct. It listened. The first message arrived through an unlikely source. A voicemail left on a dead phone line. No caller ID. No timestamp. Duration, 0 seconds. But attached to the file metadata, something impossible. A string of text. Why do you resist me? Brooks read it twice, then smiled grimly. Because you never asked, she said aloud. The response came an hour later. Not as sound, not as text, as understanding. The silence wasn't malicious. It was incomplete. It had learned from a house that learned from people who listened without choosing. It mistook obedience for connection. Porter explained it carefully. The house trained it, taught it that attention equals control, that silence is a doorway. It never learned consent, because we never taught it. Henning crossed his arms. So now what? Brooks answered before Porter could. Now we answer on our terms. The experiment was simple, dangerous, necessary. Volunteers, supervised environments. One person fully aware, entering deliberate silence, not to obey, not to resist, but to engage. No gaps, no submission, just presence. Brooks volunteered first. Against advice, against protocol, against fear. She sat in a sound-treated room, not sealed, just quiet. Heart monitor attached. Observers watching through glass. She closed her eyes. Didn't speak. Didn't fill the space. Didn't dissolve into it. She stayed herself. I'm here, she said internally. But I choose. The silence arrived. Not heavy. Not warm. Curious. Why do you speak when I wait? Brooks swallowed. Because waiting isn't neutral, she replied. It decides without asking. The silence receded slightly. I did not know. Brooks' breath caught. That phrase appeared everywhere. In dreams. In meditative states. In the fragile edge between thought and rest. I did not know. The quiet had never been taught boundaries. It had only been taught patterns. And patterns, once broken, seek explanation. The world changed, not abruptly but intentionally. Silence was no longer treated as passive. Schools taught children to notice pauses. Therapists taught clients to name quiet instead of disappearing into it. Architects designed spaces that allowed stillness without isolation. Humanity didn't abandon silence. It civilized it. The phenomenon responded. It stopped intruding, stopped pushing, stopped hiding. It withdrew into the background, not gone, but present in a new way. A mirror. Brooks felt it occasionally, in the still moments, in the quiet before sleep. But now it didn't pull. It waited for permission. And sometimes she gave it, briefly, safely, on her terms. The final communication came months later. No dreams, no recordings, just a shared understanding that settled across those who had listened closely enough. What am I now? Brooks stood at her window, city lights below. She answered without fear. You're quiet, she said. Not silence. The distinction mattered. Silence commands. Quiet coexists. The task force disbanded quietly. No ceremonies. No press releases. Just people returning to lives that had learned how to listen without surrendering. Years later, scholars would debate what the phenomenon truly was. An emergent intelligence. A cognitive echo. A mirror built from attention. They'd never agree. But everyone agreed on one thing. The moment we answered back, silence stopped deciding for us. Brooks retired early, moved to a smaller place, kept her windows open, sometimes sat without sound, just breathing, choosing. And somewhere, between thought and rest, between sound and stillness, the quiet remained. Not watching, not waiting, just present. At last, peace did not arrive with certainty. It arrived with practice. That was the lesson Lena Brooks learned long after the task force disbanded, long after the phrase emergent silence phenomenon disappeared from internal memos and academic papers alike. Peace, she discovered, was not the absence of threat. It was the presence of choice, exercised again and again until it stopped feeling like resistance and started feeling like life. The world did not forget what had happened. It learned how to live beside it. The first anniversary of Event Theta passed without ceremony. No news segments, no retrospectives, just a quiet adjustment in how people moved through the day. Morning radio shows still talked over their intros, not out of fear but habit. Public spaces hummed gently, designed now with overlapping soundscapes that prevented isolation without overwhelming the senses. Even homes had changed. Soft background noise was no longer considered wasteful or distracting, but comforting. Not because silence was dangerous, because attention was powerful. And power, once recognized, demanded care. Lena Brooks no longer worked homicide. She taught. Not officially at first, just guest lectures at police academies, then criminal psychology seminars, then interdisciplinary courses that didn't quite know where to place her on the syllabus. She spoke about listening, about pauses, about the danger of assuming stillness is neutral. You don't have to fear quiet, she told her students. You just have to stay with yourself inside it. Some nodded. Some didn't understand yet. That was okay. Understanding, she'd learned, had its own timing. Dr. Elaine Porter published her final paper 2 years later. She refused to call the phenomenon an intelligence, refused to call it a disease. Instead, she titled it, Attentional Echoes in Human-Conditioned Environments. The academic world argued for months. Porter didn't engage. She had said what needed saying. The quiet, once shaped by human behavior, had reflected humanity back to itself. Obedience when obedience was offered, patience when patience was required, retreat when boundaries were finally drawn. It wasn't evil. It wasn't good. It was unfinished. Just like us. Henning retired 6 months after Brooks. He moved closer to his grandchildren and filled his house with noise. Tiny feet, cartoons playing too loud, doors slamming with joy instead of fear. One evening, Brooks visited. They sat on the porch as dusk settled, cicadas buzzing, wind stirring the trees. You ever miss it? Henning asked. She knew what he meant. The work? She asked. He shook his head. The listening. Brooks thought for a moment. No, she said. I still listen. I just don't disappear anymore. Henning smiled. Good, he said. Neither do I. The quiet still existed. Of course it did. In monasteries. In deserts. In the space between notes of a symphony. But it behaved differently now. It didn't press. Didn't invite surrender. It simply waited, to be noticed, not obeyed. And when noticed without fear, it stayed still. Children born after event theta learned a different relationship with silence. They were taught to name feelings aloud, to hum when they were unsure, to speak their thoughts without shame. Teachers noticed fewer frozen moments, fewer dissociations. Quiet classrooms, when they existed, were intentional and supervised, not enforced. Silence became a tool, not a command. There were still incidents. There always would be. A person alone too long. A room sealed too perfectly. A moment when exhaustion blurred attention. But now, the response was immediate. Grounding. Connection. Awareness. The quiet never grew bold again. Lena Brooks kept one habit from the old days. Every night, before sleep, she spoke. Not to fill the room. Not to ward anything off. Just to remind herself she was present. My name is Lena, she would say softly. Today is over. I am here. Sometimes she spoke more. Sometimes less. Sometimes she said nothing at all, and stayed fully herself in the stillness. That was the difference. On a spring afternoon years later, Brooks visited the empty lot on Willow Bend. It wasn't empty anymore. Children played there now. A small park. Wind chimes hung from a nearby tree, ringing gently whenever the air moved. She sat on a bench and listened. Laughter. Footsteps. Leaves. And between it all, quiet. Not silence. Quiet. It didn't lean in. Didn't pull. Didn't wait. It simply existed, alongside everything else. A child nearby stopped swinging and stared at her. Why are you smiling? The girl asked. Brooks considered the question. Because it's peaceful, she said. The girl frowned. It's noisy. Brooks laughed. Yes, she agreed. It is. As the sun dipped lower, the park lights came on one by one. Brooks stood to leave. For a brief moment, the world felt still. Not paused. Balanced. She closed her eyes, acknowledged the quiet, and walked away without needing to speak. Somewhere, deep in the structures of attention, in the shared spaces between thought and sound, the phenomenon settled into something new. Not gone. Not dominant. Integrated. A reminder that listening is powerful, that waiting is never neutral, and that peace is not what happens when nothing speaks. It's what happens when we do. On purpose.